guys, welcome back to the second of our mini Madden 19 feature focuses, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at both schemes and player archetypes. So with custom draft classes, I wasn't a big fan of that, but with these two things I'm definitely more optimistic about what these features add and can bring to CFM. So with both of these things as well, they're not really new, as schemes were already a part of the game as were player types, but the difference is now in the function. So before, the coach schemes basically visually change the overall of a player to make a team or a coach value those players that fit his scheme more, but the reality behind that was that it didn't really actually do anything. If your scheme was power run and you had a receiving back, there wouldn't be a difference or any kind of impact, and that's where the biggest change comes with schemes this year. So now if you match a player archetype with a coach's scheme fit, that player is going to earn a percentage boost for the amount of XP that he earns each week from weekly training. So what that means now is that if you have that receiving back and the scheme fit calls for a power back, that player isn't going to progress as fast as he would in a scheme that called for a receiving back, or as fast as a power back would in that scheme that calls for a power back. And what this does is puts an increased emphasis and an actual impact on finding players that fit your scheme. One thing that has changed with this as well is that the archetypes are now locked based on the scheme rather than being able to adjust position by position. So as you can see here with Kyle Shanahan, all of the offensive line calls for agile offensive linemen. If you were to apply this system to Madden 18, you could just pick up any offensive lineman you wanted and then change each scheme to match, and then get the boost essentially for every position on your roster and kind of game the system. But with those positions locked, you're kind of forced to build within the limits of the scheme you choose, which again puts emphasis on finding players to fit that scheme, or change your entire scheme to better fit the roster that you've put together. Obviously this comes with some issues. One thing with this is that it's almost limiting to a fault. So with a team like the Saints, I'm not sure exactly what their scheme fit will be for running back, but obviously Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara are both completely different kinds of backs, but they're also backs that fit what the Saints are trying to do. So that kind of situation gets lost a little bit in how schemes are handled. Same kind of thing for the Chiefs, where their scheme fit is possession for all receivers, so that basically encourages you or limits you to that one type of player rather than having a good mix of guys like a lot of teams would normally do. One thing I think they could do is have coaches have more than one archetype available per position, and then basically rank or prioritize those as well, so that the boost would scale based on what they prefer. So the one they preferred most would get the full boost, the next one half of that, and then half of that if there was another one that they preferred. It's not a perfect system by any means, and I'd like to see schemes have a greater impact on the field than just being something that is tied strictly to progression. But I definitely think it's an improvement over what was there before, which was essentially nothing when it came to schemes. And I also think it's something that has good long-term potential mechanically. Like I mentioned with the coach thing, I think that there's a lot of potential to be able to tie other features into it and to continue to build it into something nice. But that's the big thing with this, and with a lot of things that have been added to CFM over the years, they get put in and then they get moved on from, and by the time you get back around to them, they have to be completely reworked because everything else around them has changed in that time rather than the features being tied into them. Overall, like I said though, I think it's a good change. One of the biggest things I worry about, and this is more so for online leagues, is the ability to game the system by changing schemes each week. I don't think there's going to be anything in place to stop a person from changing their scheme from one week to another. So hypothetically, someone could decide to practice O-line and DBs one week and just change to a scheme that benefits all the players or specific players in that group, and then switch the next week to something completely different to do the same thing. The easy answer to this is to not allow you to change schemes during the season, or to maybe allow you only one change per season, but obviously that makes things more frustrating for the user. But it also, I think, makes hiring coaches more important, and that goes back to what I said before. It's not perfect, but there's a lot of good things that can be layered on top of that and that can be done there. Moving on to player archetypes, this is again something similar to schemes in that it's not really new. We all know player types have been there for a while, but the name change to archetypes comes with additional functionality that player types did not have. And I'll get into this a little bit more when I talk about skill points, but the main difference here is that player types are now essentially how you progress your player. So each player has their primary archetype, which is going to be whatever their overall is highest in, which is also going to dictate their perfect scheme fit. And then they will also have an overall overall to go with each of the additional archetypes as well. So for your star players, they're generally going to have a high overall in multiple categories, but for a guy like Ted Yin, he's going to be, say, a decent overall for something like deep threat, but pretty low for everything else. And what happens is, as you acquire skill points, you're going to choose which archetype you want to progress. So if it's a running back and you choose to apply the skill point to the power back archetype, he's going to go up 1 overall in that archetype, and the attributes he's going to progress are going to be power back related. So trucking and break tackle and things like that. If you apply it to receiving back, then you're going to get bumps in things like catch. So again, it's not huge, but there actually is a purpose behind it, and it ties into coach schemes as well, which I think is a good thing. And I'll get more into the progression aspect, as I said, in the skill points video, but it's another thing where I think there's a decent amount of potential, and it's a good start, and it isn't something that's as limited as certain features that we've seen introduced in the past. So overall, much more optimistic with this feature. Again, it's not perfect by any means, but it has plenty of potential and room to grow. But that's also something that's usually the case with everything around this time of the year. So where we go from here is really what matters. But for this year, I think it's a decent start. But that's going to do it. Again, let me know what you guys think of this, improvements you'd like to see within schemes and player archetypes, changes if you guys have any, all that kind of stuff. But in the next video, as I mentioned a couple times, I will be talking about skill points and progression, which will also include talk about the dynamic dev trait and regression as well. So stay tuned for that. But until next time, thanks for watching.